Welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm coming at you with another 80s boombox teardown, rebuild, repair, whatever you want to call it. We're digging into another one. I don't have an exact date, however, I am certain that this was made in the 1980s. This is a Daytron RCS-7020. From my searching, this is a pretty obscure boombox, and it went under a couple different manufacturers and names. One of them is the Grundig PC-5022. Another is the clever RCS-7020, and then the Magnasonic CPS-907. It's a pretty cool little unit, and it's not in too bad of shape. However, it's not without its flaws and problems and issues, and I will get into all of those over the course of this video. So if you clicked on this video wanting to watch a dude fix and repair a vintage 80s boombox, well, you came to the right place. Okay, so one thing, it did come with a power cord, so that's nice. And let's plug it in and see if it works. I did plug in the speakers, they came not attached. So plug this in and plug that in here. And can you see that? Yes. So the tape, there's tape buttons, AM, FM, but the phono one is pressed down and it's not coming up. So if I press power, and there's essentially no output on, what am I on? See, I'm on, I can't even press FM, but if I hold it, and the tuner only goes from here to here, no matter how much you turn it, so that probably needs some lubrication. The tape player does play and it turns. I tried it with a cassette, which I can get real quick. If I open this, it does, there you go. Play. It does play, and so if I hit tape, so if I hold the tape down, the meter goes up. So we gotta address this phono button being phono. So I think the tape player does work, but I just can't get any, no sound is being output. So if I stop that, eject, that all works, which is surprising because I figured these belts would be really bad. So let's turn this off, unplug it, and there is one thing that I do want to address first before I do anything else, and that is, see, these are real crunchy too. And it's very possible that just cleaning these would have the speakers output, so we can try that first. But one thing I wanted to address was how nasty it was in here. These batteries definitely need to be removed, and this thing needs to be cleaned out, so I'm going to do that first, and then we can try and get some sound outputting of this little stereo. Alright, so we have a lot of problems on our hands right now. The stereo is not even outputting any sound, so we definitely need to take care of that. But the first thing that I wanted to take care of is the batteries that were left inside of this thing. I'm not exactly sure why this happens, but after owning now multiple vintage boomboxes, this has happened more than once where I've ordered one on eBay and it was shipped to me with batteries, old batteries still left inside. These things are ridiculously crusty. I'm sorry I couldn't find a date on them, so I don't really know how old these batteries are. I'm guessing from the 90s, possibly from the late 80s, but yeah, these things have been there for a while.
Thankfully, most of the corrosion stayed on the batteries and didn't transfer to the battery compartment. There's still some bigger chunks, but aside from that, it's actually not too bad. And I was more concerned about getting it cleaned off the metal parts, and I'll do a better job of cleaning up all the plastics at a later time. When the unit arrived to me, the speakers were not attached to it, so when I plugged them in, I did sense that the connections were a bit crunchy. I don't think that this is the problem that is causing the unit not to output any sound. However, I did think it was a good idea to clean those up. This video was recorded and this was only the second vintage boombox I've ever messed around with, but now in my life, after having done a ton of these, I will explicitly say that always try the easiest thing first, and that is usually just cleaning all the parts, all the sliders, all the switches, all that, and that usually fixes most problems. When things are crackly or they're not outputting the same on left and right, or when something is not outputting at all, a lot of the times it's just a bad contact, whether in a potentiometer, a switch, or a dial, a knob, a slider, anything like that. So cleaning those should be the first thing that you try. I was able to get the phono switch unstuck, which is very nice. However, the tuner is still stuck, so we gotta dive in there. After having torn down a whole mess of these at this point, it's the same procedure for all the ones that I know of, and that's just a bunch of screws on the back that is holding on the front plate. However, while tearing this down, I noticed a peculiar jack on the side of the unit, which is covered by the speaker, and we'll get back to that later. Removing the faceplate, even after you've gotten all the screws out, can be a little peculiar. Sometimes the tape deck needs to be ejected, sometimes you need to pop off some buttons, sometimes you need to pop off some sliders. Anyway, there's usually something else. If it's not just coming right off, there is a reason, and it is being held up. Just take your time, don't force anything, and it's pretty easy to see what parts of the faceplate are being held back by something, and then just take that piece off and it should work. Now that we're in the unit, you can see where the record button is broken, and it looks like that plastic tab has just snapped, and that should be an easy fix. I'm trying to get access to the tuner here because the string seems to get caught and then it doesn't want to move past a certain point, and that is causing it so that you can only tune in a very small amount of stations, which is not ideal. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with the string or the pulleys, it just isn't moving. It's like it's sliding on the potentiometer, so hopefully I can look at that from the backside. Now just inspecting the tape deck heads, and everything looks very clean and there's not a lot of dirt and grime here, which is excellent. At this point, I'm just trying to get to the main circuit board as well as the backside of that tuner knob so I can take a look at what's going on there. For most of these little boomboxes, you are going to have to remove the cassette deck, and this one is quite peculiar because the motor is actually attached to the back and there doesn't seem to be a way to take that out of there. After getting stumped by the cassette deck not really giving me any further options, I realized that these buttons also needed to be removed for further disassembly. Even with the buttons removed, I still needed to press down on the switches because they were protruding far enough up to impede sliding out the rest of the unit. Once the switches were out of the way, I could finally get into the guts of this little unit, and of course the antenna is always still attached, and usually there's some battery attachments to the main circuit board. And here you can see the tuner knob and how it is not functioning and it's just slipping on the rope right there. I figured this would be something obvious, and looking between the sandwiched circuit boards, I could see the dial there is getting hung up on something. So if I manually really press this thing hard, I can get it to move past it, and then that seemed to free it up quite a bit, and I was happy with the action going forward on that. I guess I could have broken the string, which you really don't want to do because I was applying a lot of force. However, sometimes these things are just old and gunky and they just need a little bit of help, and then once that happens, everything seems to be working a lot better. These were the switches that were sticking, like the phono button and the FM, AM, all those buttons are right here, and they kind of have a strange like relayed attachment to where the switch, you're not actually pressing the switch, you're pressing some plastic piece which goes into some other thing which goes into the actual switch itself. This design is good that a bunch of dust can't really fall into the switches. However, if you need to clean the switches, you need to disassemble the unit, because there's no way you can spray a bunch of cleaner down into the switches because they're hiding further up into the boombox case. It's very possible our no sound issues are just because these particular switches are not making contact or good enough contact, so I will be spraying a ton of cleaner in there and working these switches in and out a bunch of times. Is this the culprit or is it something else? We're gonna find out right now.
Cleaning the switches, will that be enough to make it work? No. That's really cool. What's not really cool is that it doesn't work. Okay, so I'm curious if this headphone jack will output anything. This came out of this, which I assume is probably part of the slider, but I'll deal with that later. The tuner seems to be working. Okay, well, it could be something on the board then. Okay, so I do have some headphones and a 1/4 inch adapter because old equipment used giant connectors. Oh! Yeah, okay. So left channel looks like it needs this slider put back in somehow. But this works. Does the tuner? Yes. Okay. It's possible if I unplug this that the speakers will work. No. Sometimes it gets stuck thinking that the headphones are plugged in when they are in fact not. Well, we're better than we were. It also has other jacks on the side though. So it's possible that the ones on the back do not. And that would be kind of cool. So let's try this.
Just happen like that, happen like that. You can see the stars align, but I know that it's more than timing. I believe it goes just wanna go.
Okay, so the tuner knob went back to its state of being stuck again after I had dislodged it, so I need to investigate further on that. However, the good news is that this stereo actually works, so we fixed it, but we also broke it because the left channel slider, I broke it while I was cleaning it, which I've never done before, so I'll have to try and fix that later. Oddly enough, the motor for the cassette is actually soldered to the back of the board. So if you want to remove the cassette completely, you have to desolder it from the back, which is strange. Usually they'd have a connector on that. Okay, admittedly, it was a very stupid oversight of me to not understand how the stereo actually worked, because all the stereos I have ever dealt with have speaker jacks on the back, and usually these smaller units do not have detachable speakers. I have never ever seen a stereo that had speaker jacks where you would actually put the speaker, because the speaker is covering those jacks. So I thought maybe there was two separate jacks, like when you have the speakers attached, then you plug them in the back, but when you have them detached, you plug them in the side, I guess. I don't really know, but I should have known better, but I didn't, and that's how you learn things. So I'm fine with being stupid and making dumb, simple mistakes, as long as I can figure out what actually went wrong.
It's pretty much how it was before I lubricated it vigorously, and I'm not sure why that it was running real smooth, so gotta take care of that and again, and I'm gonna try and fix this slider. This piece came out of it, which I'm pretty sure is attached to the plastic and runs up and down, so hopefully I can open this from the back, and that's what I'm going to try and do right now.
To recap, I lubricated all of the cords for the tuner and it was running super smooth, and then when I put it back together it then got really tight again and was binding up. So I'll have to investigate that later, but for now I'm going to be tackling this slider. The only problem with vintage stuff is that a lot of the times you cannot find new replacements for things. So if you want to like replace a switch or a slider or a knob, you're gonna have to find one that's used, and this boombox is super obscure. It's pretty cheap. I don't think I'm gonna be finding a lot of replacement parts for this unit. So I am really hoping that I can repair this slider, because if I don't, then I will have to figure out something else, because I looked for these sliders just in case somebody was remanufacturing them, and of course they gotta have the exact footprint, they gotta be the right height, they need to be the right ohms. So yeah, trying to find them gonna be really hard to do. I was quite impressed with how well made all of the electronic components of this boombox are. I mean, this thing is jam-packed with a ton of stuff, and it's all seeming like pretty high-end, very high-quality components. I have rebuilt a bunch of other boomboxes that were much more expensive, and their internal guts were not as nice as this one. You also have to be careful desoldering from these old circuit boards, because sometimes you can break the traces and all that. Thankfully, this one was pretty well made and has held up. So now I'm just digging into the slider mechanism itself, and it's pretty simple. I've never rebuilt one of these, however there aren't that many moving parts, so it's pretty simple to figure out how it works. Once I was inside of the switch, it was very easy to see what happened and what went wrong. The little metal slider that runs along the track right there, I just super glued that back in place because it was completely detached and had fallen out of the switch. Thankfully, none of these parts were damaged. I don't know what I would have done had that spring little slider mechanism like be missing a piece or something like that. I would have had to gotten creative and maybe built my own little spring to go inside of there. Putting back together the slider is easy. You just reverse the steps, and here I am just pressing on the little tabs that hold the fiberglass or circuit board back onto the rear of it. After I did that, all I had to do was solder it back in place and just cross my fingers and hope that my repair worked. I will say that the front part of this stereo has a bunch of weird stuff that I normally haven't seen, where you have to desolder a bunch of wires to like get access to certain things like behind this circuit board. Same with needing to desolder the motor from the back of the circuit board to remove the cassette. There's just a bunch of strange stuff that normally you would have connectors on there. So it just feels like a lot of this was an afterthought, or you know, maybe they were trying to save some money on connectors. I'm not sure, but this was bizarre to me because a lot of these things and all the other vintage boomboxes I've worked on, they all have connectors for this type of stuff. After fixing that slider, all I had to do was try and shove everything back together, and this particular spot up near the switches, these two screws were very odd. There was like a gap where there was no threads, so the more you tighten it, it just spins and spins. So trying to either tighten them or loosen them, you have to like push them up to where the threads catch. I don't know, it's very strange. It's almost like the threads needed to be longer, or there needed to be some sort of washer or something to take up some of that gap, but I don't think this was like gone into by someone else and they put the wrong screws or something. Just this is how it was from the factory. To finally get behind the main circuit board, I did need to remove these actuator arms for the top switches, but once I did that, I could finally get to looking at what actually was going on with this tuner. It was the weirdest thing where after I lubed everything, it would run super smooth, and then I'd put everything back together and then it would be very tight and binding up again. Here you can see it running around just fine and working as it should, so I really didn't understand what was going on here. It's almost like it had two states, one where it was working fine and then it was like binding up. It's when I put the circuit board back onto the unit that I noticed it started to bind up more, so this gave me an idea of like, okay, maybe I can figure out what is going on here. And after looking at it, I did figure out what the problem was, and that's this little arm right here. I don't know if it like sagged over time, but it was actually touching and getting caught up on some of the through hole pins from the switches above it. After finally figuring it out, it made total sense as to why it would run super smooth with the PCB separated, but then when I put it back together, it would start binding again, and that's because I was pressing those together. Anyway, finally figured that out. Now I'm modifying the little switch levers because they were still a bit sticky even when I lubed the crap out of them and everything was good. I didn't really understand why, but then I realized that the plastic itself was kind of binding on the other end of the plastic. So the switch arm needed to be filed down, and this didn't introduce any play because it's still captive on like 3 sides. However, just removing some of that material made the switches run so much better. Now, the only component that has been untouched is the cassette player. Technically, it did work when I got it. However, it did seem like it was a little weak, so checking out these belts, they're a little worse for wear, and since I'm already back here, I might as well replace them too. I didn't have a thick belt, so I tried doing something with 2 smaller belts, and it actually seemed to work. So if it works, it does. I didn't have any of the thicker belts, but I might go back in here and actually fix that properly. So I replaced the main belt with the 2 smaller belts, and I also replaced the timer belt. This one is pretty important because even if it seems like it's working, if you're already replacing the other ones, you might as well do this little one, just because this can cause issues with it auto stopping before it's supposed to and other problems like that. Now, I think the final piece is this broken record button, and to repair this, I am using a very thick paper clip to reinforce it, because even though the JB Weld probably would be fine, this button actually requires a lot of force to push down, so I wanted to reinforce it, make sure it wasn't just going to snap again after tearing into it and doing all this work. I didn't want to just have to redo that immediately, so I'm trying to do it a little more robust. I let the JB Weld dry overnight and it seemed to be very strong and holding well, so now I'm just testing all of my fixes that I have done throughout this process, and everything seems to be running smoothly and working the way that it should have when this unit was first built. The only thing left to do was just finish the reassembly and then test it out and hope that everything works as it should.
American Conservatory. Other lock elite car.
Looks like I fixed the left channel volume.
Alright, just one kiss and you should probably leave.
That doesn't sound good at all. Well, it wasn't making that noise before. It works. Pause. Let's try fast forward. It's pretty fast. Rewind. It seems like it's running just a tad bit too slow. So. Oh, that's way too loud. I mean, way too fast. Still just a tad bit too much, but after this I think I'm pretty good. Into this access hole, and below there's a little screw, and you just turn it a little bit, and that adjusts the speed of the motor. Alright, sounds pretty decent to me. And I'll just clean these up a little with some alcohol, and then we can put it all back together. Hooray! Yeah, that only took like 3 days.
This unit not only has detachable speakers, but it also has a line input in the rear, which is really cool. And yes, I could have saved myself a lot of trouble because it literally says line input aux phono right there, which if I had just read that, then I would have known that these are not where you plug the speakers in, because those are inputs, not outputs. I'm going to be testing the auxiliary input with a Bluetooth module, and in a bunch of upcoming videos I will be repairing and restoring a bunch of other vintage 80s boomboxes, and I'm also going to be embedding Bluetooth modules inside of them, so if you want to see that, stay tuned and stick around for those future videos. I am really impressed with this boombox. Not only was it 20 bucks, but the amp inside of here is crazily overpowered for the speakers, so this thing gets insanely loud, and I'm just really happy with my purchase. I think this thing is awesome and I'm going to be using it, so check out the sounds. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was a long one, but I appreciate you still sticking around and being here, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.